My parents said I had to sell my apartment to save my brother and our family's honor from his massive debt. Defeated, I started packing, but a hidden letter from my late grandmother revealed a secret trust fund, and that my brother was the one who had been hiding it from me for years. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in my apartment was the first thing they took from me. Before they ever spoke a word, their collective anxiety filled the space, absorbing the quiet comfort I had so carefully cultivated. My home, a sanctuary of clean lines, warm wood, and the soft glow of recessed lighting I had designed myself, suddenly felt like a sterile boardroom. My parents, David and Helen, sat stiffly on my gray linen sofa, their hands clasped in their laps like nervous clients. My brother, Leo, paced by the large picture window, his silhouette a restless shadow against the setting sun. He was the reason for this impromptu tribunal. I knew it the moment my mother called, her voice tight with a familiar, manufactured urgency. "Gloria, we need to talk, all of us. It's about Leo." I had braced myself for another one of his dramas. Leo lived his life like a series of pilot episodes for a show that never got picked up. There was the cryptocurrency venture that vaporized, the high-end drone photography business that crashed, and most recently, the revolutionary app that was meant to organize, well, I was never quite sure what. Each failure was followed by a period of performative despair, then a family conference where my parents would wring their hands and devise a support plan, which usually involved their checkbook. This time, however, felt different. The air was heavier, colder. "The creditors have been calling us," my father began, his voice low and gravelly. He was a man who prized his reputation above all else. A retired bank manager, he viewed public perception as a form of currency, one he had spent his life accumulating. "They're not just calling, David," my mother interjected, her tone sharp. "They're threatening. They said they would talk to the press, to your old colleagues at the bank." My father flinched. The idea of his name being associated with public failure was his greatest fear. "It's a disaster," he said, shaking his head. Leo finally stopped pacing. He turned to face us, his expression a carefully crafted mask of remorse and tragic dignity. At 31, he still had the boyish charm that had allowed him to fail upwards his entire life. "It was a calculated risk," he said, his voice smooth. "The market shifted unexpectedly. It was a perfect storm of bad luck." It was the same speech he gave every time. A different script, same plot. My mother looked at him with heartbreaking adoration, her eyes welling with tears. "It's not your fault, darling. You were trying to build something." I remained silent, watching the familiar performance unfold. I had long ago stepped out of my assigned role as the adoring audience. I loved my brother, but my love was tangled in a thicket of resentment I couldn't ignore. While he was off taking calculated risks with our parents' money, I had been taking the slow, unglamorous path. I worked my way through architecture school, juggling 2 jobs and mountains of student loans. I had scrimped and saved for a decade to afford the down payment on this apartment, my one great achievement. It wasn't just a home. It was a testament to my own stability, a fortress I had built brick by brick against the chaos of my family's dynamics. "How bad is it?" I asked, my voice flat. My father took a deep breath and named a figure so large it seemed to suck the remaining oxygen from the room. It was a life-altering sum of money, a sum that could erase a person. "We've liquidated what we can," my mother said, her gaze finally landing on me. "Our retirement savings, some bonds, but it's not enough. We're still short." There was a pause. The weight of their unsaid words pressed down on me. I looked from my father's stony face to my mother's pleading eyes, and then to my brother, who was now studying his shoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. He was letting them do the dirty work. Of course, he was. "Gloria," my father said, leaning forward, "you have your apartment." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an inventory of my assets. The blood drained from my face. I could feel a cold dread creeping up my spine. My apartment? What about my apartment? It's appreciated significantly in value since you bought it, he continued, his tone becoming businesslike, as if we were discussing a stock portfolio and not the heart of my life. If you sell it, we could clear the entire debt, every last penny. I stared at him speechless. Sell my apa. Meant? The place where I had sketched out my first solo project, where I had celebrated promotions, where I had cried over heartbreaks. The only place on earth that felt entirely mine. You can't be serious, I whispered. It's for the family, Gloria, my mother said, her voice trembling. It's for our honor. Think of what people will say. Your brother's future, your father's legacy, it's all at stake. They were talking about saving Leo, but they were looking at me. He had made the mess, but I was being handed the mop. He was the one who had gambled and lost, but I was the one being told to pay the debt. He stood there, the tragic hero of his own story, while they asked me to burn down my world to keep him warm. I looked around the room, at the custom-built bookshelves I had installed myself, at the framed blueprints of my favorite projects hanging on the wall, at the soft light pooling on the floor. Every inch of this space was a piece of me, and they were asking me to tear it apart, to sell it off for parts, to save a man who would learn nothing from the sacrifice. The weight of their expectation was a physical force, pressing the air from my lungs and crushing the life out of the home I had built for myself. After they left, the silence they had stolen rushed back in, but it was different now. It was a hollow, mocking silence, amplifying the emptiness they had left behind. I walked through the rooms of my apartment, running my hand along the cool marble of the kitchen countertop and the smooth grain of the oak dining table. It felt like I was already a ghost in my own home, a visitor in a life that was about to be dismantled. I had said very little during their final appeal, my throat too tight with a mixture of anger and despair. My silence was taken as assent. They had hugged me, their embraces feeling less like affection and more like the sealing of a deal. Leo had the audacity to whisper, "Thank you, Glow. You're a lifesaver." Before he walked out the door, the weight of his world already lifted from his shoulders and placed squarely onto mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights blur through my unshed tears. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill. For years, I had been the responsible one, the sensible one. My achievements were quiet, steady, and therefore taken for granted. Leo's failures were loud, dramatic, and therefore worthy of rescuing. My stability wasn't seen as a success to be celebrated, but as a resource to be tapped. I was the family's emergency fund, and the emergency had arrived. The next morning, my mother called. There was no gentle inquiry about how I was feeling, no acknowledgement of the monumental sacrifice she had demanded. Her voice was brisk, all business. "Gloria, have you called a realtor yet? Your father and I think it's best to move quickly. We can't let this drag on." "I haven't even had my coffee yet, Mom," I said, my voice hoarse. "Well, don't dawdle. The market is good right now, but that could change," she replied, completely missing the point. "I've already looked up a few good agents in your area. I'll text you their numbers." She hung up before I could respond. The call crystallized a painful truth. In their eyes, my feelings were an irrelevant variable in a much larger equation of family honor and financial damage control. A few minutes later, a text from Leo chimed. "Mom and Dad told me how amazing you were last night. I knew I could count on you. I promise I'll make this up to you one day." The casual entitlement of his words sent a fresh wave of fury through me. He wouldn't make it up to me. He never did. He would move on to his next grand idea, his slate wiped clean by the sale of my future, and my sacrifice would become just another forgotten footnote in the epic of his life. Feeling defeated and utterly alone, I spent the day in a fog of numb compliance. I looked up the realtors my mother had sent, their smiling, confident faces feeling like an insult. I scrolled through listings for small, soulless rental apartments in neighborhoods I couldn't afford, the reality of my impending displacement setting in. By the afternoon, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. It was the exhaustion of a fighter who had just surrendered. I found myself standing in front of the ornate, silver-framed photograph on my mantelpiece. It was my grandmother, Victoria, taken on her 70th birthday. Her eyes, even in the black and white image, sparkled with intelligence and a hint of mischief. She was the one person in my family who had always seen me, not as a supporting character, but as the protagonist of my own story. She had been an accountant in an era when most women were not, a sharp, pragmatic woman who believed in financial independence above all else. She had passed away 5 years ago, leaving a void in my life that had never truly been filled. I remembered visiting her a few months before she died. I had just gotten a promotion at my firm, and I was excitedly telling her about my plan to save for a down payment. She had listened intently, her gaze sharp. "Good," she had said, her voice firm. "Don't ever put your financial security in someone else's hands, Gloria. Not a husband, not a friend, and not your family." Then she had squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Never let them make you small. Your strength is your own. Don't you ever forget that." Staring at her picture now, her words echoed in my mind. A profound sense of shame washed over me. I was letting them make me small. I was letting them dismantle the very independence she had championed. I had surrendered without a fight. But what fight was there to have? It was 3 against 1. My logical mind told me I had no other choice. And yet, a tiny, defiant spark flickered within my grief. They saw me as a solution to their problem. They saw my home as a liquid asset, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who my grandmother taught me to be. The decision to become an architectural designer was born from a deep-seated need to build something permanent and real in a world that felt emotionally transient. While my family was busy propping up Leo's ever-shifting dreams, I was drawn to the certainty of blueprints, the reliability of stress-bearing walls, and the quiet satisfaction of creating a space that could shelter and endure. My apartment was the culmination of that dream. I hadn't just bought it. I had willed it into existence through sheer force of will. I remembered the lean years after graduation, working as a junior designer during the day and waiting tables at a noisy Italian restaurant at night. Every dollar of my tips went into a savings account I labeled Fortress of Solitude. While my friends were traveling and going out, I was poring over budgets and market analyses. My parents thought it was a quaint hobby. "It's good to have a goal, dear," my mother would say with a condescending pat on my arm, before turning the conversation to Leo's latest, groundbreaking idea. They had co-signed his first business loan without a second thought, but had balked when I asked for a small loan to consolidate my student debt, advising me to be more responsible with my finances. The hypocrisy was staggering, but I had learned early on to stop pointing it out. Pointing it out only led to accusations of being jealous or unsupportive, so I stayed quiet, worked harder, and saved more. The day I signed the mortgage on my apartment, without a co-signer or a cent of their help, was the proudest day of my life. It was my declaration of independence. I spent the next year renovating it myself, laying flooring until my knees ached and painting walls until my shoulders burned. This home wasn't just an asset, it was a physical manifestation of my resilience. Leo, on the other hand, had never built anything that lasted. His life was a series of dazzling launches and quiet implosions. He possessed a dangerous combination of charisma and delusion. He could walk into a room and convince anyone of his vision, painting pictures with such vibrant, confident strokes that you'd forget to ask about the foundation. He spoke in a jargon of disruption, synergy, and scalability, a language designed to intimidate and impress rather than to clarify. I recalled the launch party for his last venture, SingCup, the app that was supposed to revolutionize personal scheduling. He had rented out a chic art gallery, serving champagne and tiny, unidentifiable appetizers. He moved through the crowd like a seasoned politician, dressed in a designer suit my parents had undoubtedly paid for. He gave a speech about changing the world, one organized calendar at a time. My parents had watched him, their faces glowing with pride. Later that evening, he had pulled me aside. "See, Glow, this is what it's all about. You've got to think big. You're happy with your little blueprints and your apartment, and that's great. But some of us are meant to change the game." He gestured around the room. "This costs money, Big risks, big rewards. He said it with a charming smile, but the subtext was clear. My life was small, safe, and insignificant compared to his grand ambitions. He saw my stability not as something I had earned, but as a lack of vision. My apartment was, in his mind, just a safety net for the family's more ambitious members. Now, his big risk had resulted in an even bigger failure. As my father explained the details of the debt, it became clear this wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. There were lavish expenses, questionable investments, and a lifestyle funded by money he didn't have. He hadn't just been unlucky, he had been reckless and arrogant. And now that the house of cards had collapsed, he stood in the rubble with his hands outstretched, expecting me to hand over the keys to the sturdy, sensible house I had built. Or myself. He didn't see it as destroying my world. He saw it as a simple transfer of assets, a logical solution to his problem. My home was just another line item on his balance sheet, an unfortunate but necessary casualty in the grand drama of his life. And my parents, his loyal producers, were ready to sacrifice the set to ensure their star could have another season. For 2 days, I moved through my life in a state of suspended animation. I went to work, reviewed blueprints, and answered emails, but my mind was elsewhere. It was drifting through the echoing halls of my future, trying to picture a life without the anchor of my home. The pressure from my family was relentless. My mother sent me daily texts with links to moving companies and packing supplies. My father called to give me unsolicited advice on maximizing my sale price, as if my primary concern was getting a good deal for them. I felt myself shrinking, worn down by the sheer force of their collective will. I was ready to give in. On the 3rd day, I finally called a realtor. Her name was Sarah, and her voice was kind but efficient. She asked a series of standard questions about the property and then said, "Okay, great. As a first step, I'll need you to gather all the original property documents, the deed, the title report, the initial survey, and so on. Can you get those together for me?" Her request was the stone that started the avalanche. I told her I would and hung up the phone with a heavy sigh. I knew exactly where the documents were. Years ago, my grandmother Victoria had given me a heavy, fireproof lockbox. "A woman needs a place for her secrets and her securities," she had said with a wink. Inside were my passport, my birth certificate, social security card, and a large manila envelope labeled apartment. The box was tucked away on the highest shelf of my bedroom closet behind a stack of old photo albums. I dragged a chair over, my movements slow and tired, and pulled it down. It was heavier than I remembered. I sat on the floor, entered the combination, and lifted the lid. Everything was just as I had left it. I pulled out the manila envelope, its contents representing the single most expensive and important purchase of my life. As I held it, a wave of grief washed over me so powerful it almost made me double over. This was it, the beginning of the end. As I placed the envelope on the floor beside me, I noticed something odd. The felt lining at the bottom of the lockbox was slightly raised in one corner, as if it wasn't perfectly flush. I ran my fingers over it. It was loose. My curiosity piqued, I picked at the edge. The entire felt-covered panel lifted up, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment underneath. It was a false bottom. My heart began to beat a little faster. Lying in the compartment was a single, thick envelope. It was made of heavy, cream-colored parchment paper, the kind people don't use anymore. My name, Gloria, was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, familiar cursive. The envelope was sealed with a wax stamp bearing her initial, V. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the seal. Inside were 2 things, a multi-page letter, also in her handwriting, and a sheaf of official-looking legal documents, bound with a ribbon. I unfolded the letter first. It began, "My dearest Gloria, if you are reading this, it means you have found this box's last secret, and I am likely long gone. I hope you have found it in a time of peace, but I fear you have found it in a time of need." I continued reading, my eyes flying across the page. She wrote about her love for me, her pride in my quiet strength and determination. And then she wrote about her worries. I have watched our family for many years, she wrote. I have watched your parents pour their hopes and resources into your brother, a boy with a charming smile and a hole in his pockets. They love him, but their love is a blinding one. They do not see that they are not helping him grow, but merely funding his refusal to do so. And I have watched you, my strong, sensible Gloria, become their safety net. They will not see it as such. They will call it love, duty, family. But it is an unfair burden, and one I will not have you bear. My breath hitched in my chest. She had seen it all. She had understood perfectly. Therefore, the letter continued, I have taken steps to ensure your independence. When your grandfather passed, he left me a portfolio of investments that have grown considerably. I have used a portion of this to establish an irrevocable trust in your name. It is not a king's ransom, but it is substantial. It is more than enough to ensure you will never have to depend on anyone for your security. It is your foundation, your freedom. I dropped the letter and snatched up the legal documents. It was all there, the law offices of Miller and Finch, official letterhead, page after page of dense legal text. I scanned the numbers, my eyes widening in disbelief. The initial sum was significant, and with years of accrued interest, it had grown into an amount that was truly life-changing. It was more than the value of my apartment. It was more than enough to solve Leo's problem 10 times over, not that I would. A dizzying, euphoric wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't trapped. I had a choice. I didn't have to sell my home. But as I read the final page of my grandmother's letter, the euphoria curdled into ice-cold fury. The terms of the trust are simple, she wrote. The funds were to be made available to you on your 25th birthday. I have appointed a trustee whose legal duty it was to inform you of this inheritance and to manage the account until you took control of it. I chose someone in the family, someone I hoped would do the right thing and prove my cynicism wrong. I have appointed your brother, Leo, as the trustee. I read the line again and again. Leo. My 25th birthday was 3 years ago. For 3 years he had known. He had known this money existed while I was working 2 jobs. He had known it was there while I was saving every penny for this apartment. He had known about it last week when he stood in my living room, the picture of sorrow, and watched as our parents demanded I sell my home to save him. He had known, and he had said nothing. He hadn't just forgot. He had actively hidden it. This wasn't an oversight. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. The discovery of the letter didn't just change my circumstances, it reforged me. The grief and helplessness that had plagued me for days evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline anger. The fog of familial obligation lifted, and I could see the landscape of my life with perfect, painful clarity. I was not a daughter or a sister in that moment. I was a strategist. My first call was not to my family. It was to Mr. Miller, the senior partner at the law firm listed on the trust documents. He was an old friend of my grandmother's, a kind man with a voice like warm gravel. I explained the situation, and he listened without interruption. "Ah, Victoria," he said with a sad chuckle when I finished. "She was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. I'll be happy to help you, Gloria. Let me pull the file." My second call was to a financial advisor who walked me through the preliminary steps of taking control of a trust. The path was clear and legally straightforward. Only then did I call my mother. "I need to have another family meeting," I said, my voice even and calm. "Tonight, at my apartment, we need to discuss the realtor's assessment." The lie came easily. I needed them on my turf, in the very space they had tried to strip from me. They arrived that evening, their expressions a mixture of impatience and anticipation. They thought this was the final step in my capitulation. My father had a notepad, ready to discuss offers and closing costs. Leo looked relaxed for the first time in weeks, the crisis already a distant memory for him. They sat on the same sofa as before. I remained standing. "So," my father began, getting straight to business. "What did the realtor say? What's the asking price?" "I didn't discuss a price with her," I said calmly, "because I've decided I won't be selling the apartment." The shift in the room was instantaneous. The casual atmosphere vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. My mother was the first to speak. "Gloria, what are you talking about? We had an agreement." "No," I corrected her gently. "You had an expectation. I was too shocked to argue, but I've had time to think and the answer is no." My father's face began to flush with anger. "This is not the time for selfish games, Gloria. Your brother's entire future is on the line." "I am keenly aware of what's on the line," I said, my gaze shifting to Leo. He was looking at me with a new expression, not anger, but a flicker of something like irritation, as if I were a minor inconvenience that was becoming a major headache. I let the silence stretch for a beat before I continued. "I have a question for you, Leo." My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room. "I was just reminiscing the other day. Do you remember my 25th birthday? It was 3 years ago. We all went out to that Thai restaurant downtown. Anything important happened that year? Anything you might have forgotten to mention?" I saw it then, a flash of pure panic in his eyes. He paled, his confident demeanor crumbling in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, looking to our parents for support. "Don't you?" I walked over to my desk and picked up the thick parchment envelope. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence was my weapon. I held up the letter. "Because Grandma Victoria seems to remember something." My parents stared at the letter, confused. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. I didn't read the whole letter. I didn't need to air all the paint. Old truths my grandmother had written about their family dynamic. I just needed one. I found the passage and read it aloud, my voice clear and steady. "I have appointed a trustee, whose legal duty it was to inform you of this inheritance and to manage the account until you took control of it. I have appointed your brother, Leo, as the trustee." I looked up. My mother and father were staring at Leo, their mouths slightly agape. The idea was so foreign, so contrary to the narrative of their lives, that they were struggling to process it. "A trust," my father finally managed to say, looking at me. "What trust?" "An inheritance," I said, my eyes still locked on my brother. "One that Leo was supposed to tell me about 3 years ago." Leo finally found his voice, a weak, reedy version of his usual confident tone. "I was going to tell you," he insisted, his eyes darting between our parents. It's complicated. The market was down. I was waiting for the right time to maximize its value. I was managing it for you." The lies were so clumsy, so transparently false that it was almost pitiful. He was defaulting to the jargon he always used to obscure the truth. But this time, it wasn't working. The facts were simple, stark, and written in our grandmother's undeniable hand. He had lied, and in doing so, he had been willing to let me lose everything. The revelation of the trust didn't end the conflict. It simply changed the battlefield. The initial shock in the room curdled into a tense, ugly stalemate. Leo, recovering from his initial panic, went on the offensive, attempting to twist the narrative from one of his deception to one of my supposed ingratitude. "You don't understand," he said, directing his words to our parents, his voice regaining some of its old, persuasive cadence. "Grandma Victoria was from a different time. This isn't just free money, it's family money. It has to be managed correctly. I was protecting it, protecting her." He gestured towards me as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. "Gloria is emotional. She would have spent it frivolously." My mother, desperate to believe in the son she had always idolized, latched onto his explanation. "Is that true, Leo? You were just trying to help." "Of course," he said, seizing the advantage. "And now it's a good thing I did, this trust. It can solve our problem, it can save the family." I watched in disbelief as he attempted to spin his profound betrayal into a stroke of genius. He was trying to frame the inheritance not as mine, but as a communal asset that he, in his great wisdom, had safeguarded until the moment of the family's greatest need. He was trying to steal it from me all over again, right in front of my eyes. But I was prepared. The cold fury from the day before had settled into an unshakable resolve. While he was scheming, I had been gathering facts. Before the meeting, Mr. Miller had emailed me a crucial piece of information. "It wasn't just your responsibility to tell me, Leo," I said, my voice cutting through his performance. As trustee, you received annual financial statements. Every single year. Is that correct? He hesitated. That's standard procedure, yes. So for 3 years, you have received official documents detailing the exact value of the trust. You knew precisely how much it was worth and you deliberately said nothing. I turned to my parents. 2 years ago, I was laid off from my job. I struggled for 6 months. I burned through my savings. I remember calling you in tears, worried I was going to have to sell my car to make rent. And all that time, I said, my gaze returning to Leo, you knew. You knew there was a safety net, but it wasn't for me. You were saving it for yourself. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I saw a flicker of doubt in my mother's eyes. My father looked from Leo to me, the gears of his logical, banker's mind slowly turning. He understood paperwork. He understood procedure. Mr. Miller, Grandma's lawyer, is sending over the copies of those statements. I continued, pressing my advantage. The ones that were mailed to your address, Leo. The ones you received and hid. We can look at the dates if you like. We can match them up with the months I was desperately searching for a new job. This was the irrefutable proof. Not just the existence of the trust, but the active, ongoing nature of his concealment. It wasn't a single, forgotten conversation. It was a conscious choice he made year after year. Leo's face went white. He had no more lies left. The smooth charm, the confident rhetoric, it all dissolved, leaving behind a raw, ugly core of pure selfishness. He looked cornered, like an animal caught in a trap. My mother finally looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time without the filter of her adoration. I saw not anger in her face, but a deep, painful wave of disappointment. The pristine image of her golden boy was cracking right before her eyes. "Leo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Did you really? All this time?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, exposed. The silence that followed was more damning than any confession. He had been willing to watch me suffer, willing to see me lose my home, all to protect a safety net he considered his own. The family honor he claimed to be so concerned about was a sham. The only thing he had ever been interested in protecting was himself. The final, desperate unraveling of my brother happened right there in my living room. Cornered by the undeniable truth, with no more rhetorical escape routes, Leo finally abandoned all pretense of charm and reason. The mask fell away, and for the first time, our parents saw the person he truly was. His face, which had been pale with shock, contorted into a mask of bitter resentment. His eyes, usually so full of calculated charisma, now burned with a raw, childish fury. He turned on me, his voice dripping with a venom I had never heard from him before. "You," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You have no idea what it's like. The pressure I'm under to succeed, to carry the family name. You just sit here in your perfect little apartment with your safe little job. You don't take risks. You don't build anything." I stood my ground, my heart pounding but my resolve like steel. "I built this," I said quietly, gesturing to the room around us. "And I did it without anyone else's money." His laugh was harsh and ugly. "Grandma always favored you," he sneered, his voice rising. "The quiet, responsible one. I was the one out there actually trying to make something of myself, and she gives you the safety net. That money wasn't just for you to hoard. It was meant for the family. It was for emergencies." Well, guess what, Gloria? This is an emergency. It was the confession we all needed to hear. In his rage, he had admitted to the core of his worldview. My inheritance was not my own. My assets were not my own. My life was a resource pool for his ambitions. He felt entitled to it, to all of it. He saw my grandmother's gift not as a measure to protect me, but as a family slush fund that he, the most important member, should have control over. My father, who had been silent and ashen-faced, finally spoke. His voice was low, but it carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "Enough, Leo." "No, it's not enough," Leo shot back, turning his fury on him. "You pushed me. You always talked about legacy, about making a name for ourselves. I did this for you, for our reputation. We asked you to be responsible, my father said, his voice cracking with a pain that was awful to witness. "We did not ask you to gamble away your future and then demand your sister's." But Leo was beyond reason. He looked at me, his expression curdling into one of pure disdain. "Fine," he said, his voice laced with spite. "Keep your precious money, keep your stupid apartment. I hope you're happy in here all alone." And with that, he turned and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard that the framed prints on the wall rattled. The sound echoed in the crushing silence he left behind. My mother was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. My father stood rigid, looking at the door his son had just slammed, his face a ruin of shame and disillusionment. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a bitter, entitled stranger. I looked at my parents, not with triumph, but with a deep, weary sadness. The victory felt hollow. I had saved my home, but my family had been irrevocably broken. "The family honor you were so worried about," I said, my voice soft but clear. It wasn't threatened by his debt. It was threatened by his greed. It was shattered the moment he decided his needs were more important than my entire life. And it was shattered when you agreed with him. I walked over to the picture of my grandmother, her smiling face a beacon of sanity in the wreckage. "I am not selling my home," I said, speaking to them but also to her. "I will not be paying his debts. He made his choices, and for the first time in his life, he is going to have to face the consequences alone. I am done." My mother looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Gloria," she whispered, we were wrong." They were the words I had longed to hear my entire life. But hearing them now, in the smoldering ruins of our family, brought me no joy. It only brought a profound sense of release. The burden of their expectations, the weight of my assigned role, it all lifted. I was finally, completely on my own. And for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt free. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, a new, fragile reality began to take shape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage that had to be navigated. Leo's downfall was as swift and public as my parents had feared. Without the family bailout, his creditors descended. He was forced to declare bankruptcy, a process that stripped him of his flashy car, his rented penthouse apartment, and the last vestiges of his self-styled entrepreneurial image. The story did indeed leak to the local business journal, just as my father had dreaded, but the narrative was one of a reckless young businessman, not a family in disgrace. The shame was his alone to bear. Leo disappeared from my life. He didn't call, he didn't text. I heard from a cousin that he had moved 2 states away, taking a menial job and living in a small, rented room. The universe had, in its own way, provided him with the lesson my parents never could. Actions have consequences. Whether he would ever truly learn it remained to be seen. My relationship with my parents was fractured, perhaps permanently. They called, their conversations stilted and full of remorse. My mother cried, apologizing over and over for her blindness. My father, in his own way, tried to make amends, offering financial advice on how to best manage the trust. I accepted their apologies but kept a careful, healthy distance. The trust between us had been broken, and I knew it would take a long, long time to rebuild, if ever. The dynamic had shifted forever. I was no longer the dependable daughter. I was an independent woman, and they were slowly learning to treat me as such. My first order of business was to secure my inheritance. With Mr. Miller's guidance, I legally removed Leo as trustee and assumed direct control of the trust. It was a simple, unemotional process. Seeing my name, and mine alone, on the official documents felt like a final, definitive victory. I didn't touch the principal. I set up a plan with my financial advisor to invest it wisely, letting it grow. It was, as my grandmother intended, my foundation, my freedom. One cool autumn evening, about a month after the showdown, I was sitting on my balcony, sipping a cup of tea. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of infinite possibilities. My apartment was quiet, filled with the peaceful, comforting silence that I had fought so hard to reclaim. It felt more mine than ever before. My gaze fell upon the portrait of my grandmother, which I had moved to a more prominent wall in my living room. I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. She had given me more than just money, she had given me a lifeline. She had armed me with the truth, and in doing so, had given me the strength to stand up and fight for myself. She had seen the woman I was capable of becoming long before I saw it myself. I raised my cup in a silent toast to her. I had honored her wish, not just by claiming the inheritance, but by embracing the independence it was meant to provide. I had faced down the suffocating weight of familial duty and had chosen my own well-being. The cost had been high, but the peace I felt was priceless. My home was safe. My future was secure, and I was finally free. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.